I would love for you to just unpack that a little bit, you know, of what was in the mind of the average person in medieval Christendom, if you will, and in light of the Crusades. What did they think? I mean, not the PR version, if you will, but what was really in the mind of those? How did they view the Crusades?
Well, first of all, once again, to keep repeating this, they viewed it as an act of love. They also viewed it very significantly, and we forget this in the modern world, but they very significantly viewed it as an act of penance. Crusading and penance, as in penance after confession, was a very significant element of the Crusades. It was unpleasant, it was expensive, it was dangerous, it was likely to result in your death. Yeah. It was an extension of pilgrimage per se as being an act of penance. This is an armed pilgrimage that is even more dangerous and difficult than an ordinary pilgrimage, and it's a way to expiate the temporal penalties for your sins.
Yeah, it's a huge sacrifice. When you consider Chaucer's account of the pilgrimage to Canterbury,
yes.
I mean, those pilgrims knew they'd come back.
Yes.
But if you go to Jerusalem to liberate the holy places, the likelihood is you'll never come back.
On the First Crusade, it may have been as many as 3/4 of the participants who didn't come back.
You know, there's a disconnect here that I think can be overcome, at least in part, by an analogy, because, you know, I think many of us have read Tom Brokaw's The Greatest Generation. And you can see through the eyes of men, just like my dad, what it was like to fight and to sacrifice and to go overseas, either the Pacific theater or the European theater, and how many lives were lost, but how much more than just life was lost. I mean, it was a tremendous sort of secular penance.
Yes,
and you can look at it cynically after the fact and say, no, it was just an attempt to kind of spread things, you know, American. You know, and we celebrate Veterans Day, we celebrate Memorial Day, and rightly, because we recognize the virtue of patriotism and the sacrifices, you know. But when you fight world wars to make the world safe for democracy and economic freedom, that's one thing. But if you're going to fight to make the world safe for religious freedom and the Christian faith, so that Christian families that have been conquered and captured and enslaved and forcibly converted, you know, it seems to me that is not a lower priority.
Right. No,
from an eternal perspective, it's a higher priority.
And that is a good definition of what the Crusades were about.
Right. Yeah. Well, and in your elaboration of this myth, a four-part myth, one of the charges that is typically made is that these guys were governed by cynicism. They didn't believe the propaganda.
That's not
true. It was all claptrap. Yeah. They were driven by a lust for conquest and money and a kind of weird piety. But all of that is balderdash. They were driven by this desire to liberate something sacred, something precious, and they were prepared to make a supreme sacrifice of self, their own blood.
They were.